Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and thanks for stopping by again. My last video was called A Big Surprise, and it talked about a Gallup poll that, among other things, had discovered that on a question regarding relocation overseas, in this case permanent relocation, that the percentage of Americans in particular had grown by some 60% from the average that they'd held to for many, many years in the surveys taken. I'm not going to go into all the detail on this or how much trouble Gallup goes to or the fact that they do this all over the world and so forth. That's all in the other video in quite some detail. So rather than repeat that, I'm just going to say listen to that one if you need the background. Now, I said that when they finally came out with some more information, I'd share it with you, and this is exactly what has happened. There will be a link to their latest report down below in the description underneath this video. There are basic things that they discovered. One is that there is a political dynamic involved here, and I'm just going to leave it at that. You will notice it when you read the essay or the report. It's rather obvious, but it's not my concern here. I'm much more concerned with the type of people who are most interested, or where the increase in interest has been most dramatic. And these are people who eventually we might see coming down. Now, in this particular question, keep in mind that people were not saying they were definitely going to do it. It's just that they were, ideally, if they could, they would do it. They would like to do it. It's not necessary you don't have to believe that simply because people say that they're going to do it. Of course not. But this is where it begins. I call it a trigger. And a trigger is, it's hard to explain. It's different for different people. Someone may have read about an article about retiring in Latin America or something on several occasions and thought that's interesting and not really done anything. And then someday they see it again and they start looking a little more deeply into it. They start checking out countries. They look at airplane fares and how much it would cost to get down there and all this sort of business. And there's always a first moment when something triggers the interest in a person who begins that process and then ends up relocating. It just doesn't happen magically some night. It develops. And that's what I would look at here, is that these are groups that for which they're thinking about something they may not have been thinking about before, and this can serve as a trigger to some of them. It could be 2%, could be 20%, who knows, but some of them to actually go on to relocate in the future. And I suspect that will be the case, not just in this incident, in this particular concern, but it's always been that way with people, and people across the board. So you can take a look at it. One of the findings they find surprising is the very large percentage of young adults under 30 who are interested. I don't find that surprising. Our own surveys, as I mentioned in the other video that we did for years, indicated very clearly that young adults were very, very interested. It's volatile. That number goes up and down a lot, but it's really there. The second, and definitely a surprising one to me, was the very dramatic increase in interest among women. And you will see that. Men had a 30% increase in interest among males. Females had doubled. It's a 100% increase. And that's very, very significant, and it's very, very obvious. I mean, statistically significant and significant otherwise too, depending on your opinion of these things. Any event, it also indicates, I think, that the women today, and this is particularly true among younger women we hear in this survey, are really very much independent people who make their own judgments, and will pack up and go off somewhere and live or work just as a male counterpart would, in numbers that might not have happened, or probably wouldn't have happened 40 or 50 years ago when I was their age. It just is the way the world was. The world has changed, and so have they. So, in any event, the number of women rose very substantially. But the group that interested me were those between the ages of 30 and 49. They had almost doubled. They went from 10% to 19%. That's pretty dramatic. Now, that's an age group unlike the younger adults who definitely are at a higher likelihood of having the resources needed to make such a move. And not young people do it, but they often do it as backpackers. They do it, they're very flexible, they live on very little money, and they develop their work and whatever that way. Whereas people who are older tend to want more right from the beginning, particularly, of course, if they have children, they have to find a school and so on. But in that age group, in the 30s and 40s today, many more are single than were single in the past. Many more childless couples. And without children, don't have to worry about schools per se. And then others, of course, do have children, and they come too. But the critical point here is that it's a lot easier for many of them in that age group to move today than it was, say, 30 years ago. It's that simple. So these are, I think, are all very, very interesting to note. I'm very interested to note that the poorest 20% had a very substantial increase in those who wanted to relocate if they could. I can understand that when you're at the bottom of the heap and you're really poor, this is going to sound good. But there's also an increase in those in the richest 20%. Although there's still a smaller group, and went from 8 to 12%, still, that's within the realm of significance. So we've got something that's going on, and you see the political side of it there if you like. I actually think there's something more profound than that going on, and that it's just, it's a situation that's developed in North America and Europe. It's a level of frustration, and sometimes people just feeling exhausted from the difficult situations they face at home. And sometimes it's not so much a question of they like so-and-so or don't like so-and-so, but rather they're just tired and they'd like to get away from that. I can understand that completely. It's hard for me to keep pace with it all without getting depressed a lot. But I've done it for years and years and years, so I do it. I can survive that. But it's much easier to do it from down here than to do it from up there, I can assure you. So I think this is something that's going through people's minds, and I sat with a gentleman from France, and very recently I've been talking to a number of people who've been down over the last couple of months, quite a few people actually. And they have, as you may well know, some difficulties in France, and there's been a lot of tension there. There's been a lot of eruption of feelings, particularly at the end of 2018, but still happening in 2019, at least at this point in January. Very unfortunate, but it's not just an American thing, and it's something much broadly concern to many people who typically would not have in the past. So we find people from all over the world arriving, and they all come with different stories. This indicates that there might be more coming from the U.S., and these are the groups that appear that are most likely to provide the actual people who come. How long it takes for them to actually come, it could be 3-4 years before any of them showed up. They could be here next Tuesday. I mean, you don't know where people are in their heads right now. This Gallup didn't go into that kind of detail. So, enough said. Here is the results. I wanted to share them with you. You're welcome to comment on them. The political side of it, that's meant for other websites, other places where they discuss American politics. Feel free to carry the information onto those sites. But here we'll stick to the more general comments about the people and about people who are headed toward Panama. Fair enough. Thank you for stopping by. I look forward to seeing you again soon, and with more information I hope will be useful to you. Before I forget, in about a week's time here, we're going to start getting the first of our arrivals for World Youth Day. Whether we end up with 300,000 or 400,000 or 500,000 people arriving in Panama City, I have no idea. But we're ready as we're going to be. And I think it's going to be interesting. You know, there's going to be a lot of good young people here for a good purpose. And I intend to enjoy it, but I also intend to get out there and buy food so I have enough and I don't have to worry about going to the grocery store during that week. For those of you coming down, I assume you've got your housing and your reservations made and without problem. So this is the last time I'm sure I'll be mentioning this as a sort of a warning to people coming down. It's all going to be over with by the end of January. And we'll just, if I mention it again, it'll be just sort of a commentary on what happened. Hopefully, I think it's going to be a good thing. So we'll find out soon enough. Thank you.